Okay, class. We're trying something a little bit different today. I'm still experimenting with some things. The school district leans towards Meet, Google Meet. So we're going to record at least half of this lecture on Google Meet today. So if it has a different video look to it, that's what's going on. So we're going to give that a shot, and we're going to divide this up in sort of chapter 5 and then the start of chapter 6. So it should be two 10 or 15-minute videos instead of one 30-minute video. So today we were going to talk about picking up at pioneer presses. And when we last talked, we were talking about sort of culture and society and Benjamin Franklin and flying a kite and getting people killed, et cetera. Let's talk about where we had some real progress, where we have some real advancement. And that is when it comes to the press. So the press then and now is very important. Today it's perceived, hopefully, at least in its best light, as a part of what keeps government and government officials honest, sort of a watchdog. And so at the time, about the time of the Revolution, there were 40 colonial newspapers. Almost all of them were weeklies. It's too hard to put out a daily considering the printing limitations at the time. So news would lag behind, but you would find out about certain events. And people were able to write editorials, and people were able to write essentially letters to the editor, but they almost always use pseudonyms. Some common ones that I wrote down that I found pretty humorous: Humphrey Plowjogger, Clarendon, Novenglass, Columbus, Marcellus, Publicola, just all these different names, sometimes Latin inspired. But it makes you ask the question, why wouldn't they have just used their real name? Many of those were by John Adams, who becomes obviously our second president and very involved in the revolution. Why didn't he just sign his letters John Adams? And I think the answer is very obvious. Because you fear the repercussions. Because in colonial America, you didn't have true freedom of the press. There could be consequences. Now, I will say, there are consequences for freedom of the press today. Let's say I write a letter to the editor and I say something really dumb. There could be consequences like I could lose friends, or maybe even I could potentially lose a job, depending on what I said, if it was really outlandish and really just crazy. But I wouldn't go to jail for it. Really, the only type of language you can go to jail for is threatening. So it's scary to think that in this time that if you wrote a letter that just said, "Oh, I don't like the governor," you could go to jail. Certainly, I could write a letter to the editor saying I do or do not like the governor or the president. And as long as I'm not making any threatening actions, obviously we understand freedom of the press to mean, or freedom of speech, really, for that matter, to mean, I, of course, wouldn't go to jail for that. But that was not the case in this time. But there's a court case in 1734 with John Peter Zenger that really pushes this idea in a new direction, and it becomes an American angle on what freedom of the press truly means. And so the details of it are that John Peter Zenger was a newspaper printer who published a series of articles that said that the governor of what state? Of course, I can't remember. Pennsylvania, maybe? No. New York. My apologies. That the governor of New York, whose name was William Cosby, so Bill Cosby, that's funny if you're my age, that he was taking bribes, and that he was actually firing judges and taking bribes and doing all kinds of crooked things. Now, you can, in today's world, be sued if you just make reckless accusations. But the catch is that John Peter Zenger basically proved his assertions. He had evidence to prove that this governor, Bill Cosby, William Cosby, was corrupt. And when he was put on trial, essentially, the judges said, we don't really care if it's true or not. You are going to be guilty of libel if you harm the reputation of this governor, Cosby, even if the accusations are based in truth. That's insane. Of course, it's harming to his reputation. He is a crook. That's how that sort of works. It should hurt you. Now, that means that when John Peter Zenger takes a stand and they say, did you publish this article? Or these articles? Yes. Okay. Then you're going to be guilty, but it's up to a jury. So the jury is asked by the judge, find him guilty if he printed the articles. But John Peter Zinger's lawyer, Hamilton, no relation to the one you're thinking of, said, no, that shouldn't be how it is. You should only find him guilty if it was reckless. If it's the truth, the media, the press should have the right to print the truth. Otherwise, how will we know that our governors or whatever government appointee or official we're talking about are worthy of the leadership and responsibilities that they have? Now, again, the judge said, ignore the lawyer, jury, find him guilty if you believe he printed it. He got on the stand and said he printed it. And the jury came back and said, not guilty, which just blew the minds of, I believe there are multiple judges, of the judges and of the legal community, because they're like, well, hold on, you know he printed it. You're supposed to find him guilty if he printed it. But essentially what the jury was saying was, we're not going to find him guilty of it, even though we know he printed it and technically we're supposed to, because what he printed was, in fact, true. That is what we call jury nullification, where the jury decides, I'm going to ignore the law because we think the law is wrong, or we think that in this unique circumstance, we agree with you. So I'll probably talk about this in the live session, but jury nullification, it's rare, but it still happens today. In this particular case, we can look at this as precedent to say, this is where you start to see American colonists embrace the idea of, it's okay to print something if it's true, even if it's harmful to their reputation. As long as you're not reckless, as long as you have evidence to support it. Jury nullification today is often, at least it's easiest to find out about, because there's often no humor meant in this at all, like a Lifetime movie about it. And it'll often go like this. Let's say that there is a woman in an abusive relationship, and in that abusive relationship, this woman, it's very clear she's been physically abused, emotionally abused, and there might be a series of evidence, maybe hospital visits, maybe various cries for help to family or friends, or maybe even to professionals. And at some point, something awful happens, and that woman ends up, in self-defense, murdering her husband. Now, I wouldn't call it murder if it's in self-defense, but killing her husband. But in the cases that will make the Lifetime movie, it will be like while maybe he's asleep. See, the law is very, very clear. If somebody's life's in danger, in most cases, in almost every case, you have the right to defend yourself, as long as you're not, if somebody smacks me, I'm not supposed to shoot them. But if your life's in danger, you're allowed to protect yourself. If someone's asleep, the law technically says, no, it's not technically, it does clearly say that you have an obligation and an out. You can just leave. There's no legal defense for killing a person who's sleeping. But sometimes a jury will be told, if you believe this battered wife killed her husband, even if you believe that she was abused, since he was asleep, you'll have to find her guilty. And then maybe she gets on the stand and says, I did, but she was terrified. I tried to leave before. He found me, and if the jury really believes it, and because sometimes it's really very true, and you have this history that the lawyer proves very conclusively to the jury, even though the judge is saying, yeah, but it doesn't matter. You can't kill someone while they're asleep. That can't be self-defense because you could leave. If the jury is empathetic, they can say, not guilty. And the judge will sometimes get upset and go, she told you he was asleep. And they're like, nah, she was lying. He wasn't asleep. Which is really just the jury's way of saying, sorry, you should not, nobody should be murdered, but we're going to look the other way on this one because this person was so abusive. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm saying that's what jury nullification is, and that's where you're more likely to see it in modern times. And so it's an interesting concept to sort of delve into from time to time. And it happens here to establish a very important thing, freedom of the press. Now, they then just have this hodgepodge talking about various government sort of setups. So you've got 13 colonies that we're really focused on, the ones that revolt, not the other, there's 32 altogether. And they basically say, well, what do the governors look like? Well, 8 were appointed by the king. That means a royal governor. So the king says, oh, you're the governor of New York, which was the case in this particular situation. The colonists don't have a lot of control over that, although they did figure out that they could withhold pay from bad governors, and that sort of put pressure on people to either straighten up their act or maybe just leave. There were three, that were appointed by proprietors. So in other words, like William Penn or his descendants eventually after he passed, for a while got to pick the governor of Pennsylvania. And then there were a couple, Rhode Island and Connecticut, who elected their own governor. And obviously that's the trend we go towards. Now, as far as legislature, almost all of them were bicameral, meaning two houses. So you have a Senate and a House in today's bicameral legislature. Back then, it might have been called an upper house and a lower house. It had various names throughout the colonies, but basically almost all of them had a bicameral, so two-house legislature. Local government changes. So you have basically New England, the town meeting. In the South, it's much more county government because towns are not as dense because you have those large plantations. And then, of course, in the middle colonies, you have some sort of combination of those two. Kind of makes sense. Voting is tricky. Your book will make the argument that there are all these restrictions on voting, but in the scheme of things, it was easier to vote in the colonies than it was in England because you had to be basically a white male landowner, which is, by today's standards, incredibly offensively restrictive. But in the New World, that was less restrictive than, say, in England, because being the landowner, that part is much, much easier in the New World than it would be, say, in England. And so you saw more, as a percentage of the population, more people voting. But again, let's not get this mixed up. You're still not letting women vote, minorities vote, et cetera. And you did have to own land, and not everybody did own land. Then they get into a little bit of the culture. I'm going to save that for the second part, where I show you some pictures of chamber pots and bed bugs. Let me just say that we were not very cultured. We kind of covered that in the last lecture. This will just reinforce that. We're kind of backwards, especially compared to, say, settled Europe. As far as socially, things that were taking up a lot of people's times: card playing and gambling, horse racing, cockfighting, which is, roosters fighting to the death, fox hunting, dancing, lotteries, plays. People did not celebrate Christmas in a big chunk of the country. In New England, that was considered, Puritans thought that was a little excessive. People had basically English customs and English language for the most part. And there was some religious toleration. That's kind of where we're at as they're setting the stage for the revolution. But in the next part, I'll show you a few images, and then we'll also talk about where the French come in. And they're going to set up their colonies, and how that is going to, between the French and the Spanish and the English colonies, we're finally going to have this series of conflicts, wars, and we'll get into that a little bit more in part 2 today. So thanks for being patient, and just go ahead and click on the other video to finish up today's lecture. And I don't know how to turn this off, which is kind of funny. So I guess I'll try to figure it out. There it is.